They're coming! Get the children ready! We have to move now!
Oh gods! Not again!
Before the colossal empires of recorded history ever carved their pride into enduring stone, a chilling and uncompromising promise was already reverberating across the sun-scorched, unforgiving wilderness of the ancient Near East, and it was nothing like the gentle, soothing blessing that most modern readers envision. This was not a tranquil gift of quiet, vacant farmland waiting passively for a wandering shepherd to peacefully settle down and pitch his tents. When Abraham stood beneath that vast, endless canopy of cold desert stars, trembling uncontrollably before a majestic, booming voice that seemed to emanate from the very bedrock of the cosmos itself, what he received was functionally closer to a binding legal eviction notice than a cozy, fairy tale inheritance. A sovereign cosmic voice read out, one by brutal one, the names of 10 distinct, heavily armed, deeply entrenched, and fiercely territorial foreign nations, and handed him the legal title deed to a land that every single one of them had already called home for untold generations. This was no untouched, pristine paradise waiting to be discovered. It was, in truth, the single most violently contested, ruthlessly fought over geopolitical crossroads on the entire surface of the planet Earth, densely packed with thick-walled mountain fortresses, ancient royal dynasties built on bloodlines of warfare, and towering stone altars that had been smoking with continuous sacrificial fire for centuries before Abraham ever struck his first tent peg into the ground. So forget the watered-down, sanitized Sunday school caricature of cartoonish monsters waiting to be casually brushed aside by a mere wave of a hand. The historical reality of Canaan was a razor-thin, highly precarious corridor of arable earth violently squeezed between the crashing, tempestuous waves of the Mediterranean Sea on one side and the vast, merciless furnace of the Arabian desert on the other, a stretch of land so extraordinarily narrow that a determined, fast-moving army could march its entire physical length in a matter of mere weeks, yet so strategically vital to world trade and military dominance that the greatest empires in human history would willingly bleed their treasuries and sacrifice generations of soldiers for absolute control of it. It was the sole, indispensable land bridge physically connecting the two primary power blocks the ancient world had ever produced, the divine god-kings of Egypt ruling the rich Nile Delta to the south, and the iron-fisted, relentless war machines of Mesopotamia and Anatolia dominating the fertile valleys to the north. Every merchant caravan heavily loaded with precious copper, tin, aromatic spices, or royal purple cloth had to squeeze directly through this narrow geographical bottleneck. Every invading superpower marching out to expand its territorial boundaries had no choice but to trample this exact dirt underfoot. Whoever held the keys to these treacherous mountain passes and coastal trade arteries didn't just rule a localized patch of terrain, they held their hands firmly around the economic pulse of the entire civilized world. And that exact reality made Canaan a permanent, blood-soaked arena, a place where temporary, uneasy silence was the rare exception and brutal, territorial warfare was the absolute, inescapable rule of daily existence. At the exact historical moment Abraham crossed over into this region accompanied by nothing more than a modest flock and a handful of loyal household servants, real kings were already firmly seated on real stone thrones inside heavily fortified city-states like Jericho, Hazor, Megiddo, Shechem, and the formidable mountain citadel of Jebus. Children were being born into families living behind massive defensive walls that were already centuries old when Abraham's own ancestors were infants. Thick columns of pungent smoke curled continuously upward into the sky from elaborate altars dedicated to volatile storm gods, sun deities, and brutal fertility idols, ritual offerings that had been burning without interruption long before Abraham's grandfathers had ever taken their first breath. And make no mistake about it, this was never some tidy work of pious religious fiction or retroactive myth-making. It is backed up by the cold, unyielding, undeniable reality of modern archaeological discovery. Deep beneath the earth in Egypt, excavators unearthed an extraordinary cache of clay tablets known today as the Amarna letters. Desperate, official state communications hastily scratched out in Akkadian cuneiform by panicked Canaanite vassal kings, including men like Abdi-Heba, the ruler of Jerusalem. These royal rulers were literally begging their distant Egyptian pharaohs for immediate military reinforcements, screaming that their fortified cities were actively crumbling under the crushing weight of coordinated sieges, widespread internal betrayals, and systemic civil conflict. Canaan was never a single, unified kingdom resting comfortably beneath one golden crown. It was a jagged, volatile patchwork of deeply paranoid, endlessly competing city-states that were perpetually at each other's throats, all while nervously staring toward the horizon at the massive imperial leviathans waiting to swallow them whole. This was the dark, blood-soaked stage onto which an aging, childless nomad and his small household were given a terrifying mandate: this exact land, every fortified stone, every strategic valley, every ancestral grave, will one day belong entirely to your lineage. It was handed to them not because it was empty, not because no one else claimed it, and certainly not because it was easily conquered, but because a relentless divine clock had already begun its steady, irreversible tick, a moral and historical countdown set for 400 years, and the dramatic events that unfolded within that monumental window of time represent one of the most misunderstood, gripping, and deeply complex sagas ever recorded in human history. To truly grasp the weight of this ancient drama, one must peel back the dense historical layers of this territorial roll call and confront the strange, surprising identities of the inhabitants who held this land, because embedded deep within their forgotten histories are shocking revelations that completely dismantle every comfortable, oversimplified assumption about conquest, lineage, divine justice, and human destiny. When you analyze the sheer scale of the geopolitical forces arrayed against a simple nomadic family wandering through this turbulent landscape, the human mind struggles to process how such an improbable promise could ever survive the harsh reality of ancient Near Eastern power dynamics. Every step Abraham took through the high country of Canaan was taken under the vigilant, suspicious gaze of local rulers who viewed every new encampment with deep distrust, fully aware that in this brutal world, space was the ultimate currency and land was always bought in blood. The mountain ridges were anchored by ancient strongholds whose foundations were engineered to withstand prolonged military sieges, equipped with elaborate underground water systems carved straight through solid limestone rock so their defenders could survive indefinitely while an enemy starved outside their gates. The fertile valleys were dominated by sophisticated agricultural communities that produced vast quantities of wine, grain, and oil, funding private armies of professional warriors equipped with heavy bronze armor, deadly composite bows, and swift two-wheeled chariots that could easily ride down and crush light infantry on open ground. Into this lethal environment walked a small group of pastoralists without a single piece of siege equipment, without a standing army, and without a single fortified city to fall back on if things went wrong. Yet, the promise declared that the destiny of this entire blood-drenched corridor would ultimately belong to the descendants of this solitary family. This stark, staggering contrast between the raw, overwhelming power of the Canaanite city-states and the sheer vulnerability of Abraham's small household is precisely where the true tension of the story lies, a tension that would only heighten over the centuries as empires rose and fell, treaties were forged and broken in the shadows, and the slow, heavy wheels of history turned relentlessly toward an inevitable, explosive climax that would forever alter the course of human history. The next layer of this ancient roll call peels back a set of obscure, shadowy names that most casual readers skim past without ever realizing the jaw-dropping, revolutionary stories buried deep inside them, narratives that completely upend and shatter the conventional idea that this was a simple, black-and-white tale of one isolated ethnic group blindly wiping out another. Take the Kenite, for instance. They were not some sprawling, sedentary empire tucked safely behind towering stone walls or commanding massive legions of armored infantry. They were something far stranger, far more elusive, and vastly more fascinating, a specialized, nomadic guild of master metalworkers, wandering smiths who carried their heavy iron anvils, portable bellows, and closely guarded metallurgical secrets of fire, bronze, and iron directly from one tribal settlement to the next. They moved like ghosts across the arid landscapes, forging high-grade weapons and agricultural tools for local kings and tribal chieftains before quietly packing up their mobile encampments and vanishing back into the shimmering heat haze of the deep desert. And here is the single historical detail that changes absolutely everything about how we understand this epic. When Moses fled from the magnificent, sun-drenched palaces of imperial Egypt after committing a high-profile murder and escaped into the harsh, trackless wilderness of Midian, the man who took him in as a destitute fugitive, mentored him in desert survival, and gave him his own daughter in marriage was a respected desert priest named Jethro. Ancient scripture identifies Jethro, in plain, unambiguous terms, as an active member of the Canaanite. Sit with the profound weight of that historical fact for a moment. The father-in-law, primary spiritual advisor, and tactical mentor to the very man who would eventually confront Pharaoh and lead Israel out of crushing generational slavery belonged directly to one of the very native nations explicitly marked for displacement on Abraham's ancient scroll. Instead of facing total annihilation, the Canaanite wisely chose the path of strategic alliance and covenantal brotherhood. They voluntarily marched alongside the tribes of Israel through the wilderness, settled permanently in the rugged, sun-baked southern regions near the ancient fortress city of Arad, and became so deeply woven into the intimate socio-political fabric of the nation that centuries later, when King Saul launched a massive, brutal military campaign against the warlike Amalekites, he personally issued an urgent, high-priority warning to the Canaanite to clear out of the target zone first, explicitly honoring a deep debt of covenantal kindness and military loyalty that stretched back across multiple generations. And it was from this exact same fierce metalworking bloodline that Jael emerged generations later, the iconic, ice-cold heroine who welcomed a fleeing enemy general into her tent with warm milk, waited until he fell into an exhausted sleep, and then calmly drove a heavy wooden tent peg clean through his temple with a wooden mallet, securing her permanent place in the bloody annals of ancient Near Eastern legend. Standing side by side with the Canaanite on this ancient list were the shadowy Kenizzites and the almost completely forgotten Cadmonites, elusive desert tribes commanding the eastern frontiers who would eventually dissolve into the sands of time, leaving barely a physical trace for modern archaeologists to uncover. Yet, the Kenizzites hide a historical twist just as staggering as that of the Canaanite, Caleb, the legendary, fearless warrior spy who stood shoulder to shoulder with Joshua and, at 85 years old, boldly demanded the personal right to assault and conquer the most terrifying, giant-infested mountain stronghold in the entire country, is repeatedly and explicitly identified as a Kenizzite. Think about what that means. One of the absolute boldest, most revered heroes of faith and military prowess in the entire foundational tradition of Israel was not a pure-blooded descendant of Abraham by birth, but carried the foreign bloodline of a nation listed for judgment. This monumental narrative was never about narrow racial purity or genetic superiority. It was fundamentally about spiritual alignment, unwavering personal loyalty, and which side of divine history an individual or a tribe chose to stand on when the ultimate moment of decision arrived. Then there are the Hittites, a powerful name that once made self-assured 19th century historians and secular scholars laugh out loud in condescending mockery. For many decades, skeptical academics dismissed the Hittites as a pure work of religious fiction, an invented phantom people who never actually existed outside the imaginative pages of ancient theological storytelling. That confident scholarly mockery collapsed overnight in 1906, when a brilliant German archaeologist named Hugo Winkler drove his spades deep into the high, desolate ruins of Hattusa in modern-day central Turkey. What he unearthed shocked the academic world to its core: massive, cyclopean stone walls spanning miles, towering gates carved with majestic lions, and a staggering royal archive containing over 10,000 cuneiform clay tablets proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Hittites were not a myth. They were, in reality, one of the three colossal military superpowers of the Bronze Age. A formidable empire whose deadly heavy war chariots once collided head-on with the elite legions of Pharaoh. Ramses II at the legendary Battle of Kadesh, the largest chariot battle ever fought in human history. The Hittite enclaves living inside the borders of Canaan were simply a wealthy, highly respected, an influential commercial offshoot of that Titan northern empire. It was from a wealthy Hittite nobleman named Ephron that Abraham purchased the very first piece of real estate he would ever legally own in his entire life, the cave of Machpelah in Hebron, bought as a final resting place for his beloved wife Sarah, paid for in full with 400 shekels of silver according to the strict, formal legal codes of the Hittite Empire in front of witnesses at the city gate. And centuries down the line, another Hittite warrior named Uriah would rise to become one of King David's elite, mighty men, a soldier whose fierce, unyielding personal integrity and unwavering devotion to his adopted nation stood in blinding contrast to the dark, deceitful betrayal executed against him by the king himself. Every single one of these ancient names, when examined under the harsh light of history and archaeology, tells the exact same radical, countercultural truth. This ancient story was never a simple, mechanized tale of one bloodline heartlessly erasing another. It was a dynamic, high-stakes moral drama about personal choice, about who had the wisdom to recognize the shifting tides of divine destiny and walk toward covenantal life, and who stubbornly chose to dig in their heels, fortify their walls, and fight to the death to defend a decaying, morally bankrupt, and hopelessly doomed way of life. When you step back and look at the intricate tapestry of alliances, intermarriages, and cultural exchanges taking place across the hills of Canaan, you realize that the region was a bustling melting pot of diverse cultures, languages, and specialized trades. Foreign merchants rubbed shoulders with local farmers in busy city markets, while mercenary bands offered their swords to the highest bidder among the competing regional lords. In this hyper-connected, volatile environment, word traveled fast along the dusty trade routes. Stories of miraculous interventions, shifting power dynamics, and strange omens spread like wildfire from the coastal ports to the high mountain fortresses. Everyone living in Canaan knew that the geopolitical ground beneath their feet was constantly shifting, and every tribal group was forced to continuously evaluate its alliances to ensure its own survival. Some, like the Canaanites and Canaanites, chose integration and shared destiny, embedding themselves into a story larger than their own tribal identity. Others doubled down on their isolation and military arrogance, trusting in the sheer thickness of their stone ramparts and the perceived invincibility of their gods. This profound divide between those who sought mercy through alignment and those who chose resistance through pride forms the crucial backdrop for the dramatic events that were about to unfold across the landscape, proving that in the harsh reality of the ancient Near East, faith and alignment were the ultimate deciding factors between total oblivion and an enduring legacy. Now step directly onto the dark, terrifying stage of the single strangest, most deeply unsettling event in this entire ancient saga, a night where ancient Near Eastern legal ritual, paralyzing existential terror, and cosmic promise collided in a raw, supernatural spectacle that still leaves modern scholars and theologians deeply uneasy today. Abraham was getting old. He was entirely childless, his hair turning silver as he slowly sank into a quiet, suffocating despair that no amount of general divine encouragement seemed able to alleviate. He was openly questioning his destiny out loud, asking how any of this magnificent future could possibly materialize when his only legal heir was not a son of his own blood, but a senior household servant born far away in Damascus named Eliezer. In direct response to his heavy, silent grief, the cosmic voice took the aging patriarch outside into the crisp, cool desert night, standing him beneath a pitch-black sky so thickly saturated with brilliant, unpolluted stars that it seemed to pulse and breathe with life itself. The voice challenged him to look up and count those shimmering points of light if he could, and declared that his ultimate physical lineage would be just as vast, untamable, and endless as those celestial bodies. And right there, in that quiet, trembling moment of complete vulnerability, Abraham simply believed. He did not build an elaborate stone altar. He did not offer an expensive animal sacrifice. He did not perform a single ritual or recite a formal creed. It was raw, unfiltered, naked trust, and it was that quiet internal stance of trust, rather than any legalistic act of religious performance, that was forever credited to him as absolute righteousness. Yet, being a fragile human being living in a brutal, unpredictable world where promises were routinely broken in blood, Abraham asked for something concrete, something tangible, a binding, legally airtight guarantee that his family would actually possess this land. What unfolded next is one of the most hair-raising, violent, and symbolic scenes in the entire library of ancient literature. Abraham was instructed to take a set of specific animals, a heifer, a goat, a ram, a turtledove, and a young pigeon, slaughter the heavy livestock, split their bloodied bodies clean in half down the spine, and arrange the dripping, severed halves directly opposite each other on the bare earth, creating a narrow, gore-soaked path running straight down the middle. This was not random, primitive cruelty. It was a well-known, highly formal legal ceremony practiced among ancient Near Eastern nations, known as cutting a covenant. In standard historical practice, two kings or business partners making a life-or-death treaty would walk hand-in-hand down that grim, bloody corridor between the carcasses, effectively swearing a terrifying, self-maledictory oath. May my own body be ripped apart and butchered like these animals if I ever break my word or violate the terms of this contract. But as the desert sun dropped below the horizon and a suffocating, unnatural darkness settled over the landscape, Abraham was not allowed to walk that bloody path. Instead, a heavy, supernatural trance fell upon him, paralyzing his body and filling his mind with a profound, terrifying dread. He was completely sidelined, rendered entirely passive so that he could not risk his own fragile, flawed, and mortal human follow-up. And then, as Abraham lay frozen in the dark, a smoking fire pot and a blazing, flaming torch, ancient, unmistakable manifestations of the divine presence itself, appeared out of the pitch-black night and moved alone down that narrow, bloody trench between the severed animal halves. In that terrifying, silent act, the divine took the entire, staggering burden of the oath upon himself alone. The promise was no longer conditional on Abraham's performance, his military strength, or his flawless moral record. It was tethered entirely to an eternal, unshakable character that was physically incapable of breaking its word. Yet, buried deep inside the cosmic weight of that same terrifying night was a specific revelation that completely shatters any lazy, shallow assumption that this was an impatient God snatching land on a capricious whim to favor a preferred group. Abraham was explicitly informed that his direct descendants would not take immediate control of this geographical paradise. Instead, they would spend 400 long, grueling years as brutally oppressed slaves and wandering refugees in a foreign land before they would ever set foot in Canaan as anything more than temporary visitors. And the explicit reason provided for this excruciating 4-century delay is breathtaking in its moral restraint and absolute justice, because the corruption and systemic wrongdoing of the nations currently inhabiting Canaan had not yet reached its full, terminal weight. Read that horrifying detail again and let its massive implications sink in. This was never a story about a hasty, favoritist deity clearing out innocent neighbors to make room for a new clan. This was a masterclass in cosmic patience, a God so relentlessly just that he was actively willing to let his own chosen covenant family endure 4 brutal centuries of backbreaking slavery and foreign oppression rather than execute judgment on the native Canaanite nations before their moral bankruptcy was actually fully earned. For 400 long years, the invisible clock kept ticking silently in the background. Generation after generation living in the fortified cities of Canaan was granted the precious gift of time, a 4-century window of opportunity to shift their cultural direction, to abandon institutional violence, to pull back from systemic injustice, and to turn away from religious practices that were becoming increasingly dark and depraved. But instead of repenting, generation after generation doubled down on their corruption, hardening their hearts and fortifying their cities against the moral light. As the centuries dragged on, their altars grew busier, their rituals grew more violent, and their sacred spaces became steeped in unimaginable horror, culminating in practices where screaming infants were systematically laid into the red-hot metal arms of idols as horrific blood sacrifices to secure good harvests or military victory. This is the dark, silent, and tragic backdrop against which the eventual conquest unfolded, not a sudden, random act of ethnic conquest, but the long-delayed, carefully calculated execution of divine justice after 400 years of warnings were utterly, completely ignored. As the terrifying visions of that historic night slowly faded from Abraham's mind, the true scope of his journey began to crystallize in his consciousness. He realized that he was not merely a pawn in a localized land dispute, but a crucial central figure in a cosmic blueprint that spanned generations, empires, and millennia. The bloody path between the severed animals was not just a symbol of guarantee for his immediate future, but a prophetic foreshadowing of the sheer cost, suffering, and divine commitment required to forge a holy nation out of human weakness. Every starry night that followed would serve as a silent, persistent reminder of the oath sealed in the dark, a covenant signed not with human ink, but with divine fire and blood. Abraham was being called to live as a stranger in a land he technically owned, walking through cities ruled by kings who had no idea that their time was actively running out. He had to navigate the complex social dynamics of Canaan with extreme care, balancing his ultimate divine mandate with the immediate reality of being an outnumbered nomad living among heavily armed, suspicious native populations. Every well he dug, every altar he built, and every treaty he negotiated was done under the shadow of that 400-year countdown. The weight of knowing that his distant great-grandchildren would bear the heavy chains of Egyptian slavery before ever tasting the freedom of this promised soil must have been a heavy burden to carry, yet his raw faith held firm through every trial. This profound intersection of divine sovereignty, long-suffering moral patience, and human vulnerability forms the foundational bedrock of the entire ancient narrative, setting a dramatic standard of justice that would hold every king, prophet, and empire accountable for how they treated the sacred privilege of existence on this earth. Nietzsche 4th paragraph, approximate 10,000 characters, Bina Jishi heading ya timestamp Kuhazar High. As the 400-year countdown pressed relentlessly forward in divine silence, the historical focus shifts into the dense, dark forests and jagged, inaccessible highlands where the most terrifying, imposing warriors of the ancient world made their stubborn stand, the kind of formidable enemies whose very presence could shatter an entire invading nation's courage with a single glance. Among these deeply entrenched groups were the Perizzites, whose ancient name originates from an old root word describing unwalled, scattered rural farming settlements. While their wealthier coastal neighbors hid comfortably behind massive, high stone fortifications and bronze gates, the hard-scrabble Perizzites carved out a far rougher, vastly more grueling existence deep in the untouched hill forests of the interior highlands, physically hacking through thick virgin timber to cultivate crops far away from the lucrative international trade routes. They were immensely tough, self-reliant, and fiercely independent woodsmen, first popping up in the historical record back when Abraham and his nephew Lot were forced to part ways because the surrounding pastures simply couldn't support both of their rapidly expanding livestock herds. Clear proof that even the wild, densely forested backcountry of Canaan was already fully claimed and occupied by tough local clans. Generations later, when the populous tribes of Joseph complained bitterly to Joshua that their assigned territorial allocation was far too small to house their swelling population, Joshua offered them no easy shortcuts, giving them a blunt, unvarnished challenge: march directly up into the high Perizzite forests and clear out your own living space by hand. But if the Perizzites were rugged, hard-nosed wilderness frontiersmen, the Rephaim were pure, undiluted, psychological dread embodied. The mysterious name itself carries a chilling double meaning across ancient Near Eastern literature, sometimes referring to shadowy, haunting spirits of the underworld, and other times to a very real, terrifyingly physical bloodline of giant-statured warriors who struck sheer terror into the hearts of neighboring kingdoms. Surrounding nations had their own fear-drenched names for these colossal figures. The Moabites referred to them as the Dreaded Ones, while the Ammonites labeled them the Muttering, Strange-Tongued Giants. Long before Israel ever set foot across the Jordan River, powerful coalitions of eastern Mesopotamian kings had already launched massive military campaigns into the region, smashing the majority of this ancient warrior lineage into isolated, desperate pockets of survival. The last true crowned king of that dying royal dynasty of giants was Og, the legendary ruler of the extraordinarily fertile, volcanic region of Bashan. Ancient scripture refrains from exaggerating his physical proportions with vague, romanticized poetry. Instead, it offers a stark, concrete detail by recording the exact physical measurements of his massive iron bedstead, which was preserved for generations in the royal city of Rabbah as a grim, sobering trophy of war, measuring over 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. Intimately tied to this exact same terrifying warrior bloodline were the dreaded Anakim, the fierce, imposing sons of Anak who ruled the formidable mountain strongholds surrounding the ancient city of Hebron. When the 12 Israelite scouts secretly infiltrated the land to assess its military defenses, 10 of them returned completely broken in spirit, paralyzed by psychological terror, famously reporting that the Canaanite cities were fortified directly into the heavens and that they themselves felt like tiny, defenseless grasshoppers when standing before these giant defenders. That single, overwhelming wave of collective panic was enough to instantly shatter the resolve of an entire generation, condemning hundreds of thousands of people to wander aimlessly for 40 painful years in the burning desert until that fearful generation died out and a new one arose to take their place. Yet, when the actual military campaign finally materialized 40 years later, these once invincible, giant-guarded strongholds were systematically breached and shattered, leaving only a tiny, scattered remnant of survivors who fled for asylum into the Philistine coastal cities of Gaza, Ashdod, and Gath, quietly, subtly setting the historic stage for a much later, incredibly iconic confrontation, when a young shepherd boy from Bethlehem would walk down into the valley of Elah with a simple leather sling to confront a colossal armored champion born in that very same city of Gath. The sheer tactical complexity of confronting these diverse, battle-hardened populations across such varied terrain highlights just how daunting the conquest was from a purely military standpoint. The Israelite forces were not facing a uniform, predictable army in open fields. They were forced to adapt to brutal mountain warfare, dense forest clearing under ambush conditions, and sieges against elevated stone fortresses that held every natural geographic advantage. The Rephaim and Anakim leveraged their towering physical presence and terrifying reputations to wage psychological warfare, attempting to break their enemies' morale before a single sword was drawn. The Perizzites utilized their deep knowledge of the rugged terrain to stage hit-and-run tactics from the dense forest cover. Yet, despite these overwhelming odds and the deep-seated trauma left by the original Scouts report, the narrative underscores a profound shift in momentum when faith finally replaced fear. The collapse of these legendary strongholds sent shockwaves throughout the Near East, demonstrating that neither massive physical stature, nor centuries of military dominance, nor intimidating iron relics could ultimately withstand the unfolding of a long-prophesied divine judgment. The residual presence of the giant clans in the coastal plains served as a lingering echo of an older, darker era, a constant, visual reminder to future generations of the dangers they had overcome and the formidable enemies that still lurked on the geographical margins of their destiny. Every battle fought in these highlands was a test of endurance and resolve, proving that the real victory required overcoming not just the physical giants in the land, but the internal giants of doubt, hesitation, and fear that had paralyzed their ancestors for 40 long years in the wilderness. At the absolute strategic center of this ancient territorial map stood two dominant, deeply rooted powers whose names would become permanently tangled with the turbulent fate of the entire region, the Amorites and the Canaanites. The term Amorite originates from an ancient Mesopotamian root word meaning, those of the west, and it originally described a massive, far-reaching Semitic population that had spread across the Fertile Crescent, establishing powerful, long-lasting dynasties in legendary imperial cities, including Babylon itself, where a famous king named Hammurabi would eventually carve one of history's most celebrated legal codes into solid black diorite. Inside the geographical borders of Canaan, the Amorites firmly controlled the high country, constructing formidable, heavily fortified mountain strongholds that effectively guarded both the northern high passes and the treacherous desert approaches from the south. Yet, this ancient record resolutely refuses to paint the Amorites as a flat, single-dimensional, or cartoonishly evil enemy. Back in the days of Abraham, noble Amorite chieftains named Mamre, Eshcol, and Aner stood shoulder to shoulder with the patriarch as trusted, loyal treaty partners, voluntarily risking their own lives and riding into battle alongside his small force to rescue his kidnapped nephew Lot from a tyrannical eastern coalition. Whole Amorite communities were once entirely capable of genuine honor, deep loyalty, and heroic action. What changed so dramatically over the course of the next 4 centuries was not their genetic bloodline, but their moral and cultural choices. By the time the tribes of Israel finally arrived at their borders after 40 years in the desert, Amorite kings like Sihon of Heshbon and Og of Bashan were actively mobilizing massive armies, blocking international trade routes, and aggressively seeking war. Their physical stature and military ferocity so legendary that a later Hebrew prophet would poetically compare their height to towering cedar trees and their sheer strength to unbreakable oaks. Standing directly beside them were the Canaanites proper, extraordinarily wealthy, culturally sophisticated, and completely dominant across the fertile coastal plains and lucrative shipping lanes of the Mediterranean Sea.
Stand still.
These were no primitive, backwoods tribesmen, they were master shipbuilders, skilled bronze artisans, expert architects, and shrewd international merchants, so synonymous with vast commercial wealth that the very word, Canaanite, eventually morphed into ancient slang for a wealthy merchant or trader. They exercised absolute monopoly over the harvest and production of royal purple dye, a painstakingly extracted, insanely expensive pigment derived from marine snails that became the universal status symbol of ancient royalty and power. Furthermore, they helped pioneer and refine early alphabetic writing systems, foundational script concepts that would eventually evolve over centuries into the very Latin alphabet forming the words you are reading right now. For many centuries, modern historians only knew Canaanite religion through the deeply hostile writings of their biblical rivals, until the year 1928, when a Syrian farmer's plow accidentally struck the stone roof of a buried tomb, uncovering the lost ancient city of Ugarit. Archaeologists pulled thousands of pristine clay tablets from royal libraries and temple archives there, written directly by Canaanites themselves, revealing a complex, dramatic pantheon of deities, including a supreme father god named El, a volatile, violent storm deity named Baal, and fierce goddesses like Anat and Astarte, who were intimately tied to both hypersexualized fertility rituals and brutal, bloody warfare. And chillingly, these first-hand, native records confirm the darkest allegations recorded in ancient scripture: widespread ritualized violence, sacred temple prostitution, and the horrifying practice of infant sacrifice. A historical reality further corroborated by archaeological digs across the region where thousands of small burial urns containing the charred remains of sacrificed infants were unearthed in ancient religious sanctuaries. Closing out this dramatic list of native nations were the Girgashites, a group so deeply obscure that secular history barely remembers them at all, serving as a quiet, haunting, and almost eerie historical reminder of how easily an entire civilization, no matter how settled or secure it feels in its own era, can completely vanish from human memory when it leaves behind nothing of lasting moral or historical value. The stark contrast between the sophisticated cultural achievements of the Canaanites and the dark, destructive underbelly of their religious practices presents a profound historical paradox. On the surface, their cities were marvels of Bronze Age engineering, featuring elaborate multi-story architecture, advanced drainage systems, and thriving commercial markets connected to global trade networks spanning from Egypt to Greece. Yet, this high level of material civilization existed side by side with institutionalized practices that commodified human life and elevated violence to a sacred duty. The Amorites, too, had fallen from their earlier heritage of honorable alliance into a culture dominated by military arrogance and territorial hostility. As both groups consolidated their grip on the strategic crossroads of the Near East, they created a society that was materially wealthy yet spiritually and morally decayed. This toxic combination of high technological capability and deep ethical corruption meant that their influence on surrounding cultures was potent and contagious. The high mountain fortresses of the Amorites and the bustling coastal ports of the Canaanites formed a formidable dual axis of power that dominated every aspect of life in the region, ensuring that any new nation seeking to establish a presence there would have to confront not just physical armies, but an entire, deeply entrenched worldview. The presence of these powerful, highly organized societies made the long-delayed execution of judgment all the more dramatic, as their towering walls, advanced metallurgy, and vast wealth ultimately proved completely incapable of shielding them when their 400-year window of opportunity finally came to its inevitable end. Nietzsche 6th paragraph, approximate 10,000 characters, Bina Jishi Hedinya timestamp Kuhazar High. Now comes the vital part of this ancient narrative that shatters any oversimplified assumption that this was a simple, heartless tale of one bloodline automatically replacing another, because ethnicity and genetic heritage, as it turns out, offered absolute zero guaranteed protection, and the door to divine mercy stood wide open for anyone willing to walk through it. The incoming tribes of Israel were given a deeply humbling, almost uncomfortable warning before they ever set foot across the border. They were not inheriting this land because they were morally superior, inherently righteous, or somehow better than the people already living there. They were inheriting it purely because the corruption and systemic cruelty of the native nations had finally crossed an invisible line of no return. Scripture utilizes a vivid, deeply physical metaphor to describe this reality, warning that when a human culture saturates its own soil with enough bloodshed, violence, and institutional injustice, the land itself becomes violently ill and physically vomits out its inhabitants. And then came the ultimate warning that should stop any reader in their tracks. If Israel ever adopted those exact same corrupt practices, the exact same terrifying fate would await them, a tragic prophecy that played out with devastating historical precision centuries later, when the armies of Babylon burned Jerusalem to the ground and dragged its surviving citizens away in chains. Nowhere is this absolute moral standard more brilliantly on display than in the iconic story of Rahab, a Canaanite woman living directly inside the massive, thick walls of Jericho. She possessed zero spiritual pedigree, her background was steeped in everything this new nation was commanded to avoid, and her daily profession as a brothel keeper was one of the most marginalized and looked down upon in her society. Yet, when two covert Hebrew scouts slipped into her home, Rahab made a bold, dangerous decision that fundamentally altered the trajectory of her life. She openly confessed that her entire city had been paralyzed by psychological dread ever since hearing how the sea itself had parted for these people 40 long years prior. While the proud kings and elite defenders of Jericho doubled down, barring their gates for one final, arrogant stand, Rahab tied a bright scarlet cord to her window, explicitly choosing which side of divine history she wanted to stand on. When the impenetrable walls of Jericho famously imploded and collapsed, Rahab and her entire extended family walked out completely unharmed. She was fully integrated into the community, married into one of its most prominent tribal bloodlines, and her name would eventually be woven directly into the royal lineage of King David, and ultimately, into the ancestral line of Jesus Christ himself. A strikingly similar dynamic unfolded with the Gibeonites, a local Canaanite faction who saw the writing on the wall and pulled off one of the most daring, audacious deceptions in ancient history, clothing themselves in tattered garments, carrying dry, moldy bread, and wearing cracked, patched-up leather sandals to convince the leadership of Israel that they were exhausted ambassadors from a far-off, distant land. The brilliant trick worked perfectly, securing a binding peace treaty that Israel was legally obligated to honor for generations to come. Then there were the Jebusites, perched high atop an almost impenetrable rocky mountain citadel. Their supreme military confidence in their sheer elevation and massive stone walls was so absolute that when King David finally marched his forces against them 400 years later, they arrogantly mocked him from the ramparts, boasting that even the blind and the lame could easily defend their city against his army. David's tactical answer was not a suicidal frontal assault. His elite soldiers discovered a hidden, subterranean water shaft carved deep into the mountain rock, climbed straight up into the fortified heart of the city, captured it in one of the most brilliant military maneuvers of antiquity, and renamed it Jerusalem. And in one final, deeply poetic twist, David did not simply seize the mountain top where the future temple would eventually be constructed. He paid full, fair market price for it in silver, purchasing the threshing floor directly from a Jebusite nobleman named Amarna, officially closing this ancient chapter of territorial conflict not with violent conquest, but with an honorable, legal transaction. This striking sequence of events demonstrates a profound, recurring principle. The ultimate fate of any individual or community in this epic was determined not by their ancestral origin, but by their moral posture and willingness to align with truth. Rahab the Canaanite prostitute found total salvation and honor because she acted on faith, while noble kings living in high fortresses perished because they relied on human military power and arrogant self-sufficiency. The Gibeonites, despite their deceptive tactics, recognized that resistance was futile and sought covenantal protection, securing their survival and becoming perpetual servants in the house of divine worship. The Jebusites, holding on to their proud mountain stronghold for centuries, were ultimately dislodged not through mindless destruction, but through a tactical masterstroke that converted their prideful city into the spiritual heart of an entire nation. Each of these stories serves as an undeniable testament to the accessibility of mercy and the total impartiality of justice. The geographic landscape of Canaan was not merely being redrawn by military conquest, it was being refined through a crucible of moral accountability where traditional power structures were inverted, foreign outsiders were welcomed into royal bloodlines, and proud strongholds were transformed into holy ground. This complex, nuanced reality proves that the ancient saga was far from a simplistic narrative of ethnic displacement, but a profound, enduring lesson on the power of choice, humility, and faith in the face of inevitable historical transformation. If you close the book right here, at the absolute high point of military victory and territorial allocation, you completely miss the darker, vastly more tragic, and painfully human story that unfolded immediately afterward, a slow, devastating unraveling that the ancient chroniclers made absolutely no attempt to gloss over, hide, or soften. Turn the single page from the triumphant, high-octane battle scenes of Joshua into the dark, chaotic opening chapters of the very next book, and the overall tone shifts completely into grim realism. Tribe after individual tribe simply failed to complete the task they had been assigned. One tribe couldn't push the local inhabitants out of the rich, fertile valleys because their formidable enemies deployed terrifying iron war chariots that easily shredded infantry lines on open ground. Another tribe left a massive, heavily fortified coastal stronghold completely untouched. Another allowed its defeated enemies to live comfortably right in the middle of their own tribal allotments. And other tribes didn't even attempt military action at all, they took the soft, comfortable path of least resistance, turning conquered populations into forced labor gangs to collect easy tribute instead of doing the far harder, vastly more dangerous work of completely separating themselves from a deeply corrupted culture. The Jebusites, most remarkably of all, continued to live comfortably right alongside the tribe of Benjamin in the immediate shadow of Jerusalem for more than 400 long years, a foreign, idol-worshipping enclave sitting quietly in the absolute physical heart of the nation's future capital. And this uncomfortable reality is not some obscure footnote buried deep in forgotten verses, it was recorded with brutal, unvarnished honesty, because the ancient writers wanted every single future generation to understand precisely how the subsequent national disaster actually began. It didn't start with a loud, sudden collapse. It didn't happen through a single dramatic military defeat. It started with subtle human comfort. Convenience. The slow, quiet, sensible decision to peacefully coexist with systems that had already been clearly identified as toxic, generation after generation repeatedly choosing the easy, tolerant road instead of the demanding path of total moral integrity. And the explicit warning had already been issued in plain, unmistakable language: leave these deeply rooted, institutionalized corruption standing right next door, and they will inevitably become a lethal snare, a hidden trap, a slow-acting poison quietly seeping into everything you build. That warning played out with horrific, tragic accuracy. Israel did not transform the surrounding culture slowly, methodically transformed Israel. Within a few short generations, the very altars that were supposed to be torn down to bedrock were quietly rebuilt on hilltop after hilltop across the countryside. The horrifying, unspeakable practice of child sacrifice slowly crept right back into the dark valleys sitting just outside the walls of Jerusalem. Kings who had been explicitly charged to guard the nation's moral soul, men like Ahab, instead invited full-blown storm god worship right into the royal palace, dragging the spiritual state of the entire country down to depths of depravity that rivaled the very corruption their ancestors had been sent to replace centuries prior. The exact same moral measuring cup that had been slowly filling drop by drop for 400 years before Israel ever crossed the river was now filling up all over again, except this time, it wasn't foreign nations pouring into it. It was the covenant people themselves. And that tragic, self-inflicted spiritual decline became the quiet, unyielding engine driving the rest of the entire national narrative, all the way to the catastrophic day when the massive walls of Jerusalem were finally breached by siege engines, the Golden Temple was burned to ash, and its surviving citizens were marched off into foreign exile, a haunting, mirror image of the very fate their own ancestors had once inflicted on the nations before them. This tragic turn of events highlights the profound psychological and spiritual battle that accompanies any major historical transition. The physical conquest of land, as formidable as it was, proved to be far simpler than the ongoing internal conquest of heart, culture, and daily habits. The failure to eliminate subtle compromises created a perpetual vulnerability, allowing old patterns of injustice, violence, and idolatry to quietly re-establish themselves under new management. The tragic iron chariots that once paralyzed the tribes with fear were eventually replaced by an even more dangerous enemy, internal apathy and cultural conformity. As the generations passed, the vivid memories of miraculous deliverances and solemn covenant oaths faded into distant background noise, replaced by the immediate, pragmatic desires for regional acceptance, economic convenience, and political stability at any cost. This gradual erosion of identity serves as a sobering historical case study in how nations lose their foundational purpose, not through sudden external obliteration, but through the slow, imperceptible acceptance of the very evils they were called to stand against. The tragic symmetry of the story is undeniable. The same moral law that judged the ancient Canaanite city-states held their successors to the exact same unyielding standard, proving beyond doubt that geographic titles and historical privileges offer no immunity against the universal consequences of moral decay. Nietzsche 8th and final paragraph, approximate 10,000 characters, Bina Jishi heading your timestamp Kuhazar High. When you finally step back, clear away the dust of centuries, and take in the magnificent, sweeping scope of this ancient chronicle, you are left staring at something far more intimate and urgent than a dry historical lesson. You are looking directly into a stark, unvarnished mirror aimed precisely at your own life. That haunting, unforgettable phrase whispered to a trembling old man under a pitch-black desert sky, that the wrongdoing of an entire civilization had not yet reached its full, terminal weight, remains one of the most profoundly sobering lines in all of human literature, because it exposes a cosmic reality almost too vast for the human mind to comprehend, a patience so deep, so boundless, that it is willing to wait 4 full centuries, offering every single individual and culture the maximum possible window of time to turn around before the heavy hammer of final judgment falls. Look back across that incredible roster of 10 distinct ancient peoples, and you will notice something truly astonishing: 10 completely different endings, each one handcrafted not by arbitrary fate or rigid genetic determinism, but by what those specific people chose to do with the precious window of time they were given. The Cadmonites faded quietly into the shifting desert sands, leaving behind nothing but an obscure name on an ancient scroll. The Kenite wisely chose strategic alliance over arrogant resistance, securing an enduring legacy of protection and honor that spanned multiple generations. A bold warrior carrying the bloodline of a listed, foreign nation stepped up to a giant-infested mountain with pure, unyielding faith and became one of the absolute greatest heroes in the entire saga. A people who could have been easily written off as mere enemies instead sold a grieving widower a burial plot with profound dignity, and centuries later provided a legendary king with his most fiercely loyal soldier. A terrifying dynasty of towering giants was ultimately reduced to nothing more than the physical measurements of an old iron bed frame preserved in a museum. A once honorable regional power slowly transformed into the textbook definition of a civilization that crossed every moral line it was ever warned about. A brilliant, highly sophisticated maritime empire gave the modern world its foundational alphabet while simultaneously burning its own innocent children on red-hot altars. And a mountain citadel full of arrogant defenders, so absurdly confident in their high stone walls that they openly mocked their enemies from the ramparts, ended up selling the very ground where the most sacred building in the ancient world would eventually stand. Not one single human being in this entire sweeping narrative was predetermined to fail or guaranteed to succeed simply because of the family bloodline they were born into or the physical dirt beneath their feet. Every single outcome, every ultimate fate, and every dramatic ending was forged by personal choices made inside a fleeting window of time that was always, eventually, going to close forever. And nowhere is that eternal truth more electrifying or powerful than in the story of a woman who had absolutely nothing going for her on paper, no royal lineage, no moral standing, no social status, who looked honestly at the direction history was undeniably moving, and instead of digging in her heels with everyone else to defend a doomed way of life, tied a single scarlet cord to her window and boldly chose a different future. That one quiet act of courage completely rewritten her entire destiny, her family's future, and the lineage of history itself. So here is the ultimate, inescapable question this ancient epic leaves sitting directly in your lap today, whether you feel ready to face it or not. If your own life, your choices, and your daily directions were being measured right now under the cold, unyielding light of history, what would they be waiting for? What quiet, subtle choices, made repeatedly in the hidden places of your daily existence, are filling your own moral cup drop by drop? And when the walls around your current comfort zone eventually begin to shake, because in the brutal reality of this world, the walls always start to shake, will you be the one who used your precious time to build something genuine, enduring, and true, or will you be the one still standing on the high ramparts, blindly mocking the ground collapsing right beneath your own feet? Now expand your perspective even further to take in the political chessboard playing out in the shadows behind Abraham, Moses, and Joshua, a colossal global arena involving superpowers so massive they make the internal politics of Canaan look like a localized border skirmish. To truly grasp why this narrow strip of sun-drenched land mattered so intensely to every king and general in the ancient world, you have to understand Egypt, not the tourist image of ancient pyramids and golden mummies, but Egypt as the single wealthiest, most militarized, and technologically dominant superpower on the face of the earth during this exact window of history. For countless centuries, Egyptian pharaohs treated the terrain of Canaan not as an independent region to be respected, but as an essential military buffer zone, a strategic forward defense perimeter designed to absorb and blunt any massive invasion sweeping down from the northern empires before it could ever reach the fertile Nile Delta. Imperial Egyptian garrisons were strategically stationed inside key Canaanite cities. Corrupt Egyptian tax collectors continuously extracted massive tribute from terrifying local kings. Royal Egyptian messengers rode the exact same dusty highways that Abraham's family would later travel. This is precisely why those frantic clay tablets discovered at Amarna carry such breathtaking historical weight. They were not mundane letters. They were high-level, urgent state security communications, desperate military dispatches flooding into the Egyptian royal court from terrified vassal kings pleading for immediate troop deployments as their fortresses crumbled under relentless sieges, internal betrayals, and devastating raids. Picture that scene vividly, a desperate Canaanite king sitting on a throne in a besieged mountain fortress, frantically dictating a letter in Akkadian cuneiform to a scribe, begging a distant, indifferent pharaoh hundreds of miles away for a handful of archers, while outside his high stone walls, rival warlords and roaming raiders systematically tightened the noose around his city. That was the daily, brutal reality of life in Canaan long before Israel ever set foot across the Jordan River. And this single historical detail completely reframes the entire narrative, proving that the arrival of Israel was not taking place in a stable political vacuum, it was bursting onto the scene at the precise moment an entire regional order was collapsing, a fragile network of paranoid city-states completely unraveling under the crushing weight of systemic betrayal, external raiders, and an imperial superpower slowly losing its grip on the world. Now overlay onto this chaotic landscape the mysterious, terrifying 400-year sentence handed down to Abraham that cold night beneath the desert stars, his direct descendants forced to endure brutal slavery in a foreign land before ever setting foot in Canaan as conquerors. Why Egypt specifically? Why force a nation to endure 4 centuries of crushing oppression instead of letting them quietly multiply in the desert highlands? Because Egypt was, in the ultimate historical sense, the furnace. It was the only civilization on the entire planet capable of taking a small, fragile family clan of 70 nomadic pastoralists and forcing them through an intense crucible that transformed them into a disciplined, organized, million-strong nation possessing distinct tribal structures, an unshakable shared identity, and, through sheer forced labor, an intimate, brutal education and large-scale logistics, advanced construction, and national survival under an oppressive state apparatus they would eventually have to dismantle from within. Every single heavy mud brick molded under an Egyptian taskmaster's whip was, in reality, quietly forging the internal endurance of a future nation that would need every drop of that physical and mental toughness to survive 40 grueling years in a trackless desert and execute a multi-front military campaign against elevated stone fortresses. And here is where the historical drama becomes truly staggering. Modern archaeologists and Near Eastern historians have fiercely debated the exact century of this massive labor period, but virtually every serious timeline places Israel's enslavement squarely within the golden age of Egypt's most powerful, monument-obsessed pharaohs. Mega-builders who commanded colossal armies of forced laborers to construct entire royal cities, massive grain fortresses, and soaring temples on a scale that baffles modern engineering. The very empire holding this nascent nation in heavy bronze chains was simultaneously producing some of the most stunning, terrifying architectural wonders in human history, meaning the enslaved people destined to inherit Canaan spent 4 long centuries living directly inside the formidable shadow of the most advanced, militarily terrifying civilization on Earth, watching its tactics, absorbing its organizational methods, enduring its cruelty, and being slowly hammered on the anvil of suffering into something entirely new. When the Exodus finally erupted, it was not merely a spiritual story of awe-inspiring plagues and a parted sea, though those moments rightly dominate the cultural memory. It was the violent, catastrophic extraction of an entire nation's labor force directly out of the economic heart of the world's reigning superpower. A staggering national trauma so severe that its economic and psychological shockwaves echoed through Egyptian historical memory for centuries. And this is precisely why, when those 12 scouts finally returned from their secret reconnaissance mission through Canaan and 10 of them collapsed in total psychological terror at the sight of the fortified cities and towering warriors, they were reacting with the deeply ingrained trauma of a newly freed slave population staring at military fortifications that reminded them of the very empire they had just escaped. The true miracle of the story was not just that the physical walls eventually fell, but that a population built by generations of slavery could somehow find the internal courage to face down the most formidable fortresses of the ancient Near East and step boldly into their long-prophesied destiny.
Sun, stand still, and you, moon, halt in the valley of Aijalon.